Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to English 235. Today's lecture, this is going to be the sole lecture that we're going to have this week. We're not going to have one on Thursday, but I would have said that already and echoed that within the email you would have received with this link for this lecture. So as you can see here, we're going to look at a number of poems within this collection, The Best New Poets 2019. I think it was a fairly easy read. It certainly was easier than the Black Zodiac, but maybe a little more challenging than Black Aperture. Um, and I'll introduce some poems within this collection as well as the poems outside of this collection that I think parallel some of the poems within the collection. So we're going to look at a variety of poems both within this work and outside of it. I think there are some strong works within this collection, as well as poems that seem to somehow get in their own way, especially with regard to their structure. There's some poems that there's some crazy sort of white space and sentence and stanza spacing and line spacing that's going on. I think that sometimes that gets in the way of the content of its actual message. Uh, I mean, that it's sort of like writing an essay. We wouldn't write an essay, sort of with a ton of white space. We want to follow some sort of regiment. In our case, in our class, we do MLA, Modern Language Association, and that really gives us an underpinning structure, for our work, our essay. And by the same token, I think within poetry, yes, you can experiment with line and white spacing, uh, and do it to the point where you don't interrupt what the actual poem is attempting to accomplish. Uh, so we're going to look at the first poem, Margaret Cipriano's Home Alone. Before we do that, just to cover some housekeeping. So this lecture is like some of the other lectures within this semester I used for another 235 class. So if you get some weird dates in here, just disregard them. It has nothing to do with us. I'll recap anything that's due at the end of this lecture. Uh, so let's go ahead and take a look at Margaret Cipriano's Home Alone. Okay, let's take a look at Margaret Cipriano's Home Alone. While the husband is at work, I fold napkins into neat squares. Handsome men knock on my door. They want to show me their books, but are distracted by my bright, honest napkins. I tell them I'm sorry, I can't help them helping me. They say not to worry. They're more interested in my pink azaleas. Those are azaleas. No, I tell them, that's a child's drawing. The house moves in the breeze. The whole thing is starting to feel a little flimsy. What about the rooms, they ask. These aren't rooms, I reply. Those are the pink azaleas. Your husband must be a physicist, they say. They don't know, but the husband defeathers magpies. I match corner to corner. One of the men pulls out a small knife and begins slicing an orange. Where did you get that orange? I ask. The little jeweled wedges. This isn't an orange, he says. It's the name of the boy who loves you. He holds up the peel, a smile with no teeth. Okay. The reason for the various graphics that I'm putting up here is because this poem, if you can take anything away from it, because the language is not that gripping or astonishing, save for the startling image at the poem's conclusion, is what meaning we can derive from the text. For me, the content reminded me a great deal of Jean Baudelaire's seminal work, Simulacra Simulation, as you can see here. The book details the concept of reality, namely, it seeks to examine the relationships between reality, symbols, and society, in particular, the significations and symbolism of culture and media involved in constructing and understanding of shared existence, our shared experiences, reality. Simulacra are copies that depict things that either had no original or that no longer have an original. Simulation is the imitation of the operation of a real-world process or system over time. Baudelaire theorized how the human condition and our consumption of reality and how skewed our perception of our world can become. So within the book, a strong illustration he gives is the idea of a map. Imagine you were presented a map of Medicine Hat. The map is completely in keeping with every other map you've ever examined in your past. This would be what Baudelaire would call a simulation, merely an imitation of what could be deemed the real. Had the roadmap of Medicine Hat, however, been made into a perfectly scaled three-dimensional model of Medicine Hat to such a point and degree that one could not tell the real city from the fake or three-dimensional model, then we are now dealing with what he calls simulacra. So in this way, we can begin to see, like Cipriano's poem, Baudelaire is grappling with what is truth. What is in fact reality? Are the azaleas of this poem real, or are they merely a child's drawing, as the speaker suggests? There is a great instability, Baudelaire argues, in language. Cipriano echoes that sentiment with the line, quote, the whole thing is starting to feel a little flimsy, unquote, meaning our interpretation of the real, the image, the language we construct in order to explain or even examine our world, our reality, is unreliable because we are imperfect and unreliable actors as well. One of the most memorable moments contained within this poem is its conclusion. Quote, this isn't an orange, he says. It's the name of the boy who loves you. He holds up the peel, a smile with no teeth, unquote. The instability of the image and the unreliability of language that constructs it reminds me too of a famous painting by surrealist artist Rene Magritte titled The Treachery of Images, as we can see above. The painting features the image of a pipe, accompanied by the statement, when translated to English, which says, this is not a pipe. Magritte, like Baudelaire, like Cipriano, is questioning what exactly constitutes reality. Does an image of a pipe suffice enough to stand in for the real of reality of a real pipe? He's saying no. And how precisely should we interpret the world dangling around us? Okay, so Cipriano's poem Home Alone really reminds me of Robert Hass's poem here that you can see here, a story about the body. And Robert Hass, he's a very famous poet. He's now in his 70s, but he won the Pulitzer Prize and he was the poet laureate in the early 2000s in America, the National Poet Laureate. So a story about the body. What really helped compare Cipriano's Home Alone and A Story About the Body, these two poems, are the poetic elements of symbolism and imagery and even tone. I think they're very similar. So I'll go ahead and read the poem aloud. A Story About the Body. The young composer, working that summer at an artist colony, had watched her for a week. She was Japanese, a painter, almost 60, and he thought he was in love with her. He loved her work, and her work was like the way she moved her body, used her hands, looked at him directly when she mused and considered answers to his questions. One night, walking back from a concert, they came to her door, and she turned to him and said, I think you would like to have me. I would like that too, but I must tell you that I have had a double mastectomy. And when he didn't understand, I've lost both my breasts. The radiance that he had carried around in his belly and chest cavity like music withered quickly, and he made himself look at her when he said, I'm sorry, I don't think I could. He walked back to his own cabin through the pines, and in the morning he found a small blue bowl on the porch outside his door. It looked to be full of rose petals, but he found when he picked it up that the rose petals were on top. The rest of the bowl, she must have swept the corners of her studio, was full of dead bees. You know, I never thought about this. It's a great story that's taking place in here in this one stanza. But I never thought about how it is one stanza, this one blockish sort of stanza. And Margaret Cipriano chose sort of the same dimensions of just this one block, sort of one stanza space to fill uh, her poem in. Um, so I think we're getting some symbolism. The idea here, we have symbolism, great symbolism with the bees and the rose petals going on. The double mastectomy, she would have lost the greatest thing in her life, which was being a woman. You know, one of the greatest sort of iconic physical features of any gender, right? The breasts representing a gender, in this case, a woman. So some of the imagery, some of the symbolism going on, we get that within the flowers. Uh, Within here we get the rose petals, but in Cipriano's poem we get the azaleas. You know, this symbolism of the flower. What does that mean? Some of the heavier concepts don't line up. You know, the questioning of reality. When we spoke about Baudelaire, um, um, isn't necessarily being accessed through this poem. But I thought there was some connections that can be made. Okay, let's take a look at the collection's next poem by Rachel Uwada Clifford, titled "Boys by Shape." Boys by shape. I want more of everything. Octopuses have three hearts. Are you happy with the way things are? I asked you. What I really wanted to ask you was, what would you do with three hearts? You had just come in from the rain, your clothes carrying sky. I was in the kitchen breaking the wooden moon out of an avocado. I wanted to learn you by shape. I was looking for a a wideness, the hollers, the ways you sprawled and gave. I wanted to be able to see it even in late night, to feel it in the wild limb dark. I liked you because I didn't have to think or be honest so much. Like when you go to the grocery store and buy things you can't really live off of. Dark chocolate, cheap wine, cinnamon, pounds of oranges, pulpy black fruit. It was a kind of paring down, being with you, a winnowing to the wing bone. I don't think this is going anywhere, I said, and I didn't know where it was supposed to go. It's just a thing to say when you mean to say that you have been starving. Okay. I think there are two or three poetically evocative moments within this poem. Quote, you had just come in from the rain, your clothes carrying sky. I was in the kitchen breaking the wooden moon out of an avocado, unquote. I think there's some great beauty in how Clifford casts this brilliant and fresh image of rain on clothes, the carrying of sky, and the pit of an avocado, the wooden moon. Also, towards the end of the poem, we get, quote, it was a kind of paring down, being with you, a winnowing to the wing bone, unquote. So, some startling, even ambiguous imagery going on there. Sonically engaging as well, with the winnowing of to the wing bone. In this way, Clifford is really challenging the image, bringing great surprise to our eyes due to her grappling with how exactly she should present and even represent the image to us, the reader. Okay, so here's another form um, that we're able to see many examples of within Best New Poets 2019. It's called Contrapuntal Form. Contrapuntal. It's sometimes referred to as a cleave poem. It is a poem typically with two long stanzas. It can have more than two stanzas, but it's typically two stanzas that take on the look of columns because they're standing side by side, and they offer a point and then a counterpoint, hence the name contrapuntal, to counter one point. So in this way, it can be read and therefore interpreted two ways. One reading for each column or stanza would be one way to interpret it and read it aloud. And even a third way, when you combine each stanza reading the poem in a way where it's holistically read, where you read stanza to stanza. We're going to look at an example in a moment. But Best New Poets 2019 included a few poems of the contrapuntal form. It seems to be very popular, especially within this collection. And this collection, again, it's supposed to be a very contemporary sample size, a very contemporary and very well established sample size of where poetic forms are gravitating towards. In this case, seemingly contrapuntal is one of those forms that are really becoming popular. I think it's because it could be interpreted in so many ways. The poem can be. So in this way, contrapuntal poems are those that weave two poems together, two or three, depending on the number of stanzas. The one we're looking at today, and the one that's most typical, would be the one that has two stanzas, the contrapuntal two-stanza poem. With regard to this form's history, just to give you some background information, it's difficult to know who invented the idea of contrapuntal poetry, though it's probable that it evolved from the musical idea of contrapuntal form, weaving multiple seemingly independent melodies together. So that's something that is popular within music. But examples can be found across the world, notably in China, where contrapuntal couplets are displayed as part of New Year's celebrations. These are fascinating as they demonstrate the contextual nature of Chinese language. Character may represent a word when used singularity, but then transform into an entirely different word when paired with others. In modern times, the contrapuntal poem has become more popular as a demonstration of a poet's writing ability, as these type of poems are complex in their weaving sort of form. All right, trying to weave these two stanzas together so they can read as one, but also read independently from each other. With specific regard to this form, a contrapuntal poem is actually two separate but related poems that, when read together, change the understanding of the separate pieces. So I think that's an important element to understand, that they could be read independently, as we said, fragmented, but when read together, something changes. This could be by adding context, such as one poem setting a tone that changes the reader for the other. For example, a poem about gathering food could be changed by pairing it with another on exploitative business practices or starvation. Alternately, the poems could function as separate pieces, but also as a unified piece. Layout is very important to the form as it shows the distinction between the two poems. This could be by altering the lines on the poems and aligning them to either side of the page, or indenting one poem, or perhaps the poet might want to write the poems on the same line, but separate them into two columns, as we are about to look at with our example. There are many reasons to cast a poem in the contrapuntal form, as mentioned as we already mentioned. What is important is why poets may choose to use this specific type of form. One reason would be to create a dynamism of voices that can, in effect, be fragmented as well as holistic. So they're separate, as we spoke about, because each stanza could stand alone, but they could also be smashed together holistically, read, and it still has great meaning. And it's still dynamic, the two voices that are seemingly materializing in each stanza. Okay. So as mentioned, Best New Poets 2019 has a few poems that use this form as a blueprint. Let's take a look at one such poem on page 70 titled, and it's a long title, even the title is almost a poem in and of itself. After wading through the marsh of Giglow Beach for the 19th month, the good old boys eventually uncovered the skeletal remains of Shannon Gilbert, tucked in a very tough, desolate, tangled mess, as well as the bodies of other women. So this title is methodical in nature. I mean, all titles are of poems, books, short stories, anything, right? Titles mean something. It's methodical. The author here, the poet, is attempting to give us a history lesson, right? So we get the idea of something happened to this woman because we have skeletal remains of Shannon Gilbert, right? And she was a victim of a serial killer if you look it up. So we should be able to get some of that through the poem. Hopefully, he's infusing it. The poet is infusing that sort of history lesson. John Patrick McShay in the title of the poem. But I'll go ahead and read it aloud. I'm going to start with the first stanza on the left-hand side if you want to follow along. Help us understand. Isn't it strange how a body exits the bone? Through what do we wade? Have these women been killed because they were whores? What emits this light? What powers do women hold? Explain this to us. Should we take Shannon's remains elsewhere? What will happen to Shannon's mother? Is this the catastrophism of Shannon Marie Gilbert? The rain has stopped. Is there room for a whippoorwill? A whippoorwill is the last word at the end. So that's the first stanza, right? Just a meaning one can, a lot of questioning going on. Poets posing, poets allowing the speaker to pose a lot of questions. And it's all italicized. Notice that. That's not completely common I'll tell you, within contrapuntal that you allow one voice to become italicized. So that might be some greater insight. If someone were to write an essay on that, just why would he italicize this? Is that someone speaking? If so, who is speaking? It's definitely someone speaking, but then the question is who? Okay, so now I'm going to read the stanza on the right. Across the shore, bodies of women are found dismembered and burlapped. Do you all need a reason why? There are things that grow even after death. Saltgrass, choke cherry, and some beach plum, silvery sea myrtle, lines of anglers, and the migration of striped bass, transitory rainstorm, a shrinking shoreline, fissures of erosion, a fleet of vessels beneath the horizon. They clutched life from any palm that offered. Pleiades, the seven sisters and the daughters of Pleion, have fallen to sea, and were carried by the tide. Now they rise on the beach as rain craters the sand. On the shore, my lover imbued a stone with her first menstrual blood. She kept it bedside before it vanished. Seduction is rooted in divinity, and the rosette-shelled crab is stolen by both shrew and tern. From whom do you steal the most? Her body is inert and has been here for months. To move a still thing is unnatural. Should we stab 277 times and beaten with a fire extinguisher by our other daughter? Of whom Zeus made stars, he first made doves, consequences of Orion's obsessions. Even lost Merope, stalked by the hunter, Shannon ascends the sky, a storm as transient as all things. In how many ways are you vagrants? If you want to whippoorwill, then I will give you whippoorwill. This nightjar now guards the marsh, lucent and alone. All right, wow. So that's really poetic, right? We're getting some really great imagery, some great language uh, within, and some questioning as well within the right stanza, right, of the contrapuntal form. So let's go ahead and combine it and see what we can get from it. Help us understand. Across the shore, bodies of women are found dismembered in burlap. Do you all need a reason why? Isn't it strange how a body exits the bone? There are things that grow even after death. Through what do we wade? Saltgrass, choke cherry, and some bleach plume, silverly sea myrtle, lines of anglers, and the migration of striped bass, transitory rainstorm, a shrinking shoreline, fissures of erosion, a fleet of vessels beneath the horizon. Have these women been killed because they were whores? They clutched life from any palm they offered. What emits this light? Pleiades, the seven sisters and the daughters of Pleion, have fallen to sea, and were carried by the tide. Now they rise on the beach as rain craters the sand. What powers do women hold? On the shore my lover imbued a stone with her first menstrual blood. She kept it beside before it vanished. Explain this to us. Seduction is rooted in divinity, and the rosette-shelled crab is stolen by both shrew and tern. From whom do you steal the most? Should we take Shannon's remains elsewhere? Her body is inert and has been here for months. To move a still thing is unnatural. What will happen to Shannon's mother? She will be stabbed 277 times and beaten with a fire extinguisher by her own daughter, by her other daughter. Is this the is this the catasterism of Shannon, Marie, Gilbert, of whom Zeus made stars, her first made doves, consequences of Orion's obsessions? Even lost Merope, stalked by the hunter Shannon ascends the sky. The rain has stopped, a storm as transient as all things. In how many ways are you vagrants? Is there room for a whippoorwill? If you want a whippoorwill, then I will give you whip poor will. This nightjar now guards the marsh, lucent and alone. All right. So there's some hiccups with the combining of both stanzas, but they do combine. They are dynamic to each other. So it's interesting form for that very reason. The voices that can emerge from a contrapuntal poetic form. This poem reminded me a lot, in a lot of ways, of two other poems, both of which are not contrapuntal in form, but have the same tone as this poem. The two poems are considered what are called persona poems, whereby the poet allows the speaker of the poem to become the voice or point of view of some person. Let's take a look first at Frank Bidart's persona poem, Herbert White. Okay, so Frank Bidart's persona poem, Herbert White. Frank Bidart, very famous poet, won the Pulitzer Prize a few years ago. Really old dude, like in his 80s. He writes a lot of sort of about being homosexual, and being sort of oppressed because of that, and relationships with his family, specifically his father. But he writes a lot too in other points of view. In this case, the persona poem, and he's written a few persona poems. And this one is about a serial killer named Herbert White, true story, made into a poem that I'm about to read. It's a long one, but just stick with it. And then also made into a short film, as you can see here, written and directed by James Franco. So I think it connects well to the previous poem about Shannon Gilbert being killed. I think it connects well because of the heavy and sort of macabre tone that is closely trying to pair, to the idea of death, and then meeting the crossroads of the poetic form. So I'll go ahead and read it, and then we're talking about it. Okay, here we are. Frank Bidart's persona poem, also referred to dramatic monologue. You can use those terms interchangeably and synonymously. They mean the same thing. Herbert White. When I hit her on the head, it was good. And I did it to her a couple of times. But it was funny. Afterwards, it was as if somebody else did it. Everything flat, without sharpness, richness, or line. Still, I liked to drive past the woods where she lay. Tell her the old lady and the kids I had to take a piss. Hop out and do it to her. The whole buggy of them waiting for me made me feel good. But still, just like I knew all along, she didn't move. When the body got too decomposed, I just jack off, letting it all fall on her. It sounds crazy, but I tell you, sometimes it was beautiful. I don't know how to say it, but for a minute, everything was possible. And then, well, like I said, she didn't move. And I saw under me a little girl was just lying there in the mud. And I knew I couldn't have done that. Somebody else had to have done that. Standing above there in those ordinary shitty leaves. One time I went to see Dad in a motel where he was, staying with a woman, but she was gone. You could smell the wine in the air, and he started, real embarrassingly, to cry. He was still a little drunk, and he asked me to forgive him for all he hadn't done. But, what the shit? Who would have wanted to stay with him, with Mom, with bastards, not even his own kids? I got in the truck and started to drive, and saw a little girl who I picked up, hit on the head end, screwed and screwed and screwed and screwed, then buried in the garden of the motel. You see, ever since I was a kid, I wanted to feel things make sense. I remember looking out the window of my room back home and being almost suffocated by the asphalt and grass and trees and glass, just there, doing nothing, not saying anything, filling me up, but also being a wall, dead, and stopping me. How I wanted to see beneath it, cut beneath it, and make it somehow come alive. The salt of the earth. Mom once said, man's spunk is the salt of the earth. That night, at that 29 Palms motel, I had passed a million times on the road. Everything fit together, was all right. It seemed like everything had to be there, like I had spent years trying, and at last finally finished drawing this huge circle. But then suddenly I knew somebody else did it. Some bastard had hurt a little girl. The motel I could see again. It had been itself all the time, a lousy pile of bricks plaster that didn't seem to have to be there, but was, just by chance. Once, on the farm, when I was a kid, I was screwing a goat, and the rope around his neck, when he tried to get away, pulled tight, and just when I came, he died. I came back the next day, jacked off over his body, but it didn't do anything good. Mom once said, man's spunk is the salt of the earth, and grows kids. I tried hard to come, more pain than anything else, but didn't do any good. About 6 months ago, I heard Dad remarried, so I drove over to Connecticut to see him and see if he was happy. She was 25 years younger than him. She had lots of little kids, and I don't know why. I felt shaky. I stopped in front of the dress and snuck up to the window to look in. There he was, a kid, 6 months old on his lap, laughing and bouncing, the kid, happy in his old age, to play the papa after years of sleeping around. It twisted me up to think that what he wouldn't give me, he wanted to give him. I couldn't have killed that bastard. Naturally, I just go right back in the car, and believe me, was determined to head straight for home. But the more I drove, I kept thinking about getting a girl, and the more I thought I shouldn't do it, the more I had to. I saw her coming out of the movies. She was alone, and kept circling the blocks as she walked along them, saying, you're going to leave her alone. You're going to leave her alone. The woods were scary. As the season changed and he saw more and more of the skulls show through, the nights became clearer, and the buds erect like nipples. But then one night, nothing worked. Nothing in the sky would blur like I wanted it to. And I couldn't get it to seem to be that somebody else did it. I tried and tried. There was just me there, and her in the sharp tree saying, that's you standing there. You're just you. I hope I fry. Hell came when I saw myself and couldn't stand what I see. Okay. So, long poem, really entering the vernacular, and I think that's something to point out, the vernacular of a very common person, right? You can see it here. In some ways, a sociopath. Obviously a sociopath. And Frank Bidart's able to show us that tone, that macabre tone that we see in the other poem that we read, that contrapuntal poem. Where we get a line of questioning, it's simplistically cast on the left side, the first stanza, right? Kind of like what we get here, it's simplistically cast. The line of sort of the voice and diction of Herbert White that Frank Bidart is attempting to assemble, and I think he does a splendid job. The way he talks, it makes it seem as if he's casting him as a very common person. Herbert White was. If you watch the short film, or if you just do some research on who Herbert White was, this serial killer. So I think there's some very good moments where the tones of those two poems line up. Okay, so we have two more poems, or sorry, three more poems I want to look at. And this is another persona poem. Two of them are persona poems. And then we're going to finish off with one poem from Best New Poets 2019. So as you can see here, this one's entitled Emmett Till's Glass Top Casket. So this is interesting because we're taking on the point of view, not of a person, but of something that is housing a person post-mortem. So this casket is the point of view that we're going to sort of enter throughout this poem. So just give some background information on Emmett Till, who he was. As a 14-year-old African-American, who was lynched in Mississippi in 1955. So at 14, he was lynched after being accused of offending a white woman in her family's grocery store. So for nothing more than offending someone, this 14-year-old kid was taken, beaten by white people, and then lynched in Mississippi in 1955. The brutality of his murder and the fact that his killers were acquitted, could you imagine that, drew attention to the long history of violent persecution of African Americans in the United States at this time. Till posthumously became the icon of the civil rights movement, and rightly so, like we're seeing with Black Lives Matter. And that civil rights movement becoming ever stronger each day as more and more atrocities are being committed by police officers on the black community. So I think this poem is very timely. So I'll go ahead and read it, and then I'll say one thing about it, and then we'll move on to the last two poems. So Emmett Till's glass top casket. By the time they cracked me open, topside, abandoned in a tool shed, I had become another kind of nest. Not many people connect possums with Chicago, but this is where the city ends, after all, and I float still after the footfalls fade and the roots bloom around us. The fact was, everything that worked for my young man worked for my new tenants. The fact was, he had been gone for years. They lifted him from my embrace, and I was empty, ready. That's how the possums found me, friend. Dry docked, a tattered Mercy Hall. Once I held a boy who didn't look like a boy. When they finally remembered, they peeked through my clear top, then their wild surprise. So, very interesting point of view that we're getting here afforded to the speaker by utilizing the concept of the persona poem, or as we said before, what's called a dramatic monologue. I think it's working effectively. The poet would have had to have chosen at some point, do I do Emmett Till as the point of view, or do I do something else? And they chose the latter, the something else. In this case, the thing that is the casket that housed Emmett Till posthumously. Okay, so just as a side note about Emmett Till, in 2005, his body was exhumed. So they dug up his body. They reopened the case because nobody was prosecuted for his death in 1955, um, and they found someone guilty. They took DNA and verified that it was Emmett Till, and they were able to find enough evidence to prosecute someone. So at least that has a somewhat acceptable ending. Not happy, of course. So okay, so as you can see here, I want to finish off the idea of persona poetry, or dramatic monologue poetry with Hawk Smash. So I'll go ahead and read it. It's funny. It's interesting. We're entering the point of view of Hawk, right? That's what persona poetry does. So Hawk Smash. And then we have an epigraph here. I am the least difficult of men. All I want is boundless love. So Frank O'Hara, Meditations in an Emergency. So Hawk no. Hawk have a problem. Hawk took break from Avengers after Orphanage and Tanker Trunk incident. Hawk's therapist said it cried for help. Hawk said, Hawk strong, Hawk self-reliant. Ugh. Who Hawk kidding? Hawk not really so incredible. Hawk look in mirror every day and want to smash things. Hawk never cut out to be superhero. Hawk really just regular Joe. Hawk got hungry hippos for birthday, but no one want to play with Hawk. Everyone too busy saving world. Hawk like watching Tennessee Titans with bowl of chips and dip. Hawk like to go beachcombing for giant squid carcasses. Hawk okay guy, just misunderstood. Hawk really just want to have normal 9 to 5 job. But who would hire Hawk? Hawk first tried 7-Eleven cashier job in Schertz, Texas. Hawk wore stupid uniform even though it too small. Hawk still want to smash Slurpee machine. Hawk think it give too much ice, not enough syrup. Captain America lecture Hawk. Captain America douchebag. Hawk then tried work in office job. Hawk carpool with Joan and Frank from accounting. Hawk wears snappy tie and dress shirt. Hawk even bought new purple pants. Cubicle's too small for Hawk though. Hawk hate paperwork. Hawk smash shredder. Hawk got yelled at by Shelly in cubicle next door. Hawk hate Shelly. Hawk think about Shelly every day. All right, so great poem by Greg Santos. And again, that's the beauty of, and some of the aesthetics and some of the inherent sort of structure of the persona poem or the dramatic monologue. The monologue is that we can enter the voice of anything, a casket, a person, a serial killer, and in this case, a fictitious superhero. So the final poem we're going to look at today isn't within Best New Poets 2019 is Noise, um, by Charlie Peck. In the book, it's on page 10 if you need to sort of reference it. So here it is. So Noise. I once attended a stand-up show in Amsterdam, and not speaking a word of Dutch, I just laughed, along with the crowd, letting myself get caught up with the noise. It's the same logic of applause and food fights. I can't think about the bubonic plague without getting anxious. When I watch Planet Earth, I root for both prey and predator. The border between human and disgust blurs neatly, so it's often hard to say. I was driving home from the grocery store last week, and saw that my neighbor had painted and hung a new sign on his shed. Thieves will be shot. And Kate asked, who's thieves? In high school, a boy did a Gallagher impression after prom, smashing watermelons on stage with a hammer, his fake mustache falling off mid-swing. And then 2 weeks later, his parents received a bill for $30,000 to replace the pup-smattered curtain. Or that time in second grade after we had just moved when a quiet boy in my class asked for a ride home. My mother, new to the city, got lost in cross-stitched neighborhoods in the fading light because the boy didn't know which was his. And he started crying, and my mother started to cry too, and we drove until the boy saw a familiar park, and eventually we found it, his house, and his mother was on the lawn with 2 officers, and she's crying too. And then the drive home after, my mother whispering, shit, 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 and wiping her eyes. Okay, so I really think Charlie Peck's poem, Noise, I think it sort of ties in with Cipriano's and some other poems that we looked at, and other poems within the collection, where the poet is asking the speaker of the poem to question reality, to acknowledge how unstable and even unreliable reality is, especially when we are mediated. That is to say, our experience is somehow interrupted. Perhaps here, as the poem's title suggests, the interruption is made available, or the mediation is made available through the noise, whatever that noise might be. Life, these unexpected moments, um, events that we have to sort of overcome within life. I think this concept is especially apparent in the poem's opening stanza, where the speaker of the poem doesn't understand the language, but is still sort of playing along to get caught up with the noise. Okay, it seems as if a case is really starting to be built around the relationship of this collection's poetry and how they each are starting to access some fairly common styles, forms, and even assembling some common themes. Okay, we covered a lot of territory today, from persona poem, or also called dramatic monologue, to the contrapuntal poem that has various parts to it that blend together or stay fragmented and all have dynamic meaning, to the other poems that connect to literary theories such as Baudelaire's idea of simulacra and simulation, that are within Best New Poets 2019. So because we covered a lot of territory, as always, please email me if you have any questions or concerns or ideas that you need clarified. Note, no lecture on November 19th, so Thursday of this week. We're just going to go with this lecture for the whole week. Also, we'll instead back up on November 24th with our open-ended question number 4. I would have, by the end of this week, I would have had your other one graded. So look out for that grade within Blackboard. I'll email instructions for the open-ended question number 4 on how to post it to Blackboard on the morning of November 24th. So look out for that. Okay, guys, as always, email me if you have any questions. Talk to you later. Bye.